Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Workplace Safety North webinar, Deficient Lockout of Machines Top Health and Safety Risk in Ontario Pulp and Paper Industry. My name is Gabby Lemon. I'm the event specialist here at Workplace Safety North. Before we get started, we want to mention a few housekeeping items. During the webinar, you may see the screen freeze up or hear static on the microphone. This is usually temporary and due to internet connection issues. We appreciate your patience and understanding with the technology. Your microphones have been muted, and we ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for speaker questions. If you have any technical issues using the Zoom application, do let us know in the chat box, and we'll do our best to help you. So to clarify, please put any commentary or technical questions in the chat box and speaker questions in the Q&A section. A link to the webinar recording, a copy of the presentation, and resource information will be sent to you within 1 business day. Today, we are joined by Jerry Traer and Tom Welton from Workplace Safety North. And now I will pass things over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Gabby, and good afternoon, everyone. We really look forward to the opportunity of sharing some of the results of our risk assessment and root cause analysis activities through our workshops and how we drilled down to come up with some controls through these workshops and some next steps that we'll be taking through WSN to share that information with you and the industry overall. I would like to also introduce Jerry Traer. Jerry is our program training specialist for Workplace Safety North, and he led our root cause analysis workshop, and he'll be providing a portion of the presentation as well. I'm Tom Welton. I'm the Director of Prevention Services and Education Programs for Workplace Safety North, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of all the forestry related risk assessments and root cause analysis that have been completed within our organization. From an agenda point of view, we'll provide a bit of background on the history of the risk assessment root cause analysis initiative through WSN and provincially, the risk assessment process, and discuss the process that we followed through our individual workshops, some of the solutions and controls that we came up with, as well as the resource information that came out of our workshops, as well as additional resources that WSN has put together that we'll be able to share with you at the end of the session. And as Gabby mentioned, there'll be an opportunity for question and answers throughout the meeting and at the end. Just to start out with, the risk assessment process and providing a bit of background on it, the Ontario Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development, along with Workplace Safety North, initiated the provincial risk assessment process earlier on in about 2017. WSN focused very specifically on high-risk sectors, starting out with the sawmill industry, the logging industry, most recently the pulp and paper, and we've also done a number of risk assessments that came out of the mining review back in 2015 with the mining industry of Ontario. Our initial goals and overall goals of the project was to put an integrated risk management strategy in place to assist industry in identifying first the key risks, and then providing assistance in really drilling down through a root cause analysis and providing recommendations from our sector experts that we could share through various resources. We wanted to identify the risks to worker health and safety and to work with both employers and workers to reduce those risks. And secondly, to provide more information to employers and workers about the risks at an industry sector level. And this is something you'll find is very specific throughout this entire presentation. The risk assessment and root cause analysis were led by the pulp and paper sector, both workers and management representatives, and the results are very reflective of the comments from that industry. Using the workshop format led by Dr. Sujoy Day, who has been the corporate risk officer. He's moved on from that position, but he has been a significant support for Workplace Safety North and allowing us to move this ahead. Our goal was to involve sector experts, right from frontline workers to supervisors and managers, and supporting resources through Workplace Safety North, as well as the Ministry of Labor, Training and Skills Development, to draw on specific knowledge of workplace risks. This approach recognizes that all industry sectors are unique, and sector-specific feedback provides unique industry-specific feedback on the needs of the sector and allows us to really pinpoint the greatest risks and drill down into those risks to identify what the root causes are to allow controls to bubble up through the process and allow us to prioritize those to see how we can assist the industry. The risk assessment process is very sector specific, as I've mentioned, to the pulp and paper industry. Risk is defined through the context of uniqueness that exists within each industry sector. And as I mentioned, we've made this very specific to the pulp and paper sector as we've gone through the process. And we tapped those resources to ensure that we got that frontline experience of workers, supervisors, and managers that work on the front line on a daily basis. The risk assessment includes prioritizing the risks, which provides greater decision-making confidence that resources from the occupational health and safety delivery system are directed in areas of highest risk within the system, based on risk profile identified through the workshops. So as I mentioned, the information we've got and prioritized is coming directly from the industry and gives us greater confidence that these are really key areas that we need to focus in on as an occupational health and safety system, right from frontline workers to supervisors to other health and safety supports internally within companies and externally through the health and safety system in Ontario. The capabilities of capturing diverse and numerous risks within each sector will help decision makers design customized approaches to deal with these risks and really allowed us through the system and through industry support to develop a very tailor-made approach to the intervention, which you'll see as we go through the entire process here. The model that we used for the risk assessment project was the Swiss cheese model. It identifies that there are a number of controls put in place by industry, including specialized designed equipment. There could be regulations that are put in place, training. There could be specific skill sets associated with that training. And there could be other things that have been put in place to really put controls in place to protect workers. However, we know that all those controls are not consistently done. They are not 100% in every case because there are out of the norm situations that happen, and they can result in things like designing issues, gaps in regulations, gaps in training, or material not being current, shortages of key skill sets, and potentially overall unsafe conditions. And these individual gaps that are produced by these issues allow an opportunity for the process to really fall apart. And it can, simultaneous failure of many of these gaps can result in risk controls that could be catastrophic, and in many cases can result in very severe incidents. And anyone who, any of you that have been involved in incident investigations know this, that when you start to drill down in an incident investigation, you find that it's not just one thing that has generally been a gap in the process. You generally find multiple things that have combined to result in a very high level incident in many cases. This is the template that we utilized, and we provided this to each of the participants of our risk assessment prior to the risk assessment. We hold a meeting with individual participants, either face-to-face or through a webinar format, and we really focus in on one key question. We want them to identify the situation or condition that could result in an injury or illness within a pulp and paper operation, their operation, or others that they've dealt with. but really focusing in on what keeps you up at night from a situation or hazard condition point of view. We encourage them to identify as many as they can come up with. We also encourage them to engage others in their workplace to get some feedback. And in addition to the situation or condition that's identified, we're looking for contributing factors, current controls that are in place to complement that particular situation or condition, and any evidence that they have, such as hard data, research, or knowledge. And the individual participants complete this, and they can put, as I mentioned, as many of these situations or controls into this template. That's provided back to the facilitator at WSN. We consolidate all this information. We don't remove anything. We consolidate it into one format, and that's the basis of our workshop. Throughout the workshop, on the far right of the screen, you'll see that likelihood and consequence are really the primary discussion during our workshop. We've identified, and we go through all the individual hazards and situations that have been identified by the participants prior to the workshop, at the workshop itself, and then we vote on each individual one, identifying the likelihood or the consequence coming up associated with that to calculate the overall risk. And that allows us to prioritize the individual situations or conditions that could result in injury or the overall risk. This is an example of the completed document for our number one risk, which was identified, which was caught or struck by stationary equipment. And it can lead to falls, unconsciousness, or crushing. So this was the number one priority, which industry felt that was keeping them up at night. Some of the contributing factors included lack of hazard identification, inattention due to distraction, lack of training or attention to danger zone, and as you can see, there are a number of others. And this is a consolidated list based on all responses we got from the industry representatives. Some of the current controls that were put in place were identified, everything from regulations to manufacturer or operator's manual procedures to supervisor oversight. And then some of the supporting evidence really range from everything from injury statistics, which could be WSIB statistics or company statistics, on-site observations, or human resources documentation that could be available as well. At this point, I'll turn it over to Jerry Trayer, who will carry you through the remainder of the presentation and provide some additional information regarding the overall process, the controls, and where we're going from a WSN perspective with this.
All right, thanks, Tom. So actually, I think Tom spoke a little bit about the the workshop participants being peer recognized industry system experts. So we did have potential people from all over from a lot of the companies. One of the things that I know when we were doing this was making sure that they understood that, we were looking for the things that, maybe not in their particular workplace, but for the whole pulp and paper sector. So they had to try to think like that, not think about how this was going to be affecting them, but how it was going to be, dealing with the whole sector as a whole. The process was open, transparent, collaborative. We did, obviously, we did the risk assessment portion back in, I think it was in the fall of 2019, pre-COVID. So that one was done in class or up in North Bay in one of our meeting rooms. When we came back in the fall of 2020 to do the risk or root cause analysis component of it, we definitely did that as a virtual course. There was a couple of us up in the North Bay office, but all of the participants, the industry people, were actually all virtual. And so part of this process is the ranking prioritization that Tom has mentioned already of causal factors. So this is probably getting more into the second component of it. So I'll speak to the process in a minute here. And even in situations in the risk assessment process, the employers and workers were the only ones that voted on that likelihood consequence, and the ML, the Ministry of Labor and WSN did not get involved in the voting. So it was only industry people that were doing the voting. Right. So here is this map. So the risk assessment portion, which was actually the first one back in 2019, the fall. This is the mapping process for that. There was 79 identified events that came out of the 2 days with the risk assessment group. And so they did, went through a process of using the risk assessment models you see below, very similar to the one that we actually use already. And there's one dot you will see up in the top right corner, a red dot in the red section, and that's the lockout component that was the only one that actually scored in the critical area. So we did all these rankings of causal factors, and proceeded from the risk assessment into the root cause analysis, which was a year later, taking all that data we pulled together in the risk assessment, and then started to work on the causal factors and also the controls that I'll show later on. So here, this is kind of the, and I know some of these aren't it's hard seeing them. And I do think these will be available in the resources for people. On the left is the top 10 health and safety risks that came out of the risk assessment component. Again, there was 79 events that they identified, and then going through the voting process between workers and employers, people, our management, they narrowed that down to the top 10. In fact, all of them were ranked. So there is a list of the 79 in risk order. And then so that's the risk assessment component. When we get to the root cause analysis, what we're doing is we're taking that top one on the left-hand side, the number one, which is lockout. We actually started to break that down. We went through a process where we had 45 causal factors that we identified in 6 areas. So it's the people, process, tools and machines, culture, and environment. And we got people to really start to speak to, why those, under those categories, what are the factors that are causing our problems? And again, we rank those in the top 10. And that led us to the next part, which was the next day, taking all the top 10, which when you think about, really doesn't seem like it's a lot of work to go through the top 10 causal factors, but it ended up taking the whole day to come up with some controls based on those. So that's the third one, which is the controls, coming up with controls for each of the causal factors. So this is kind of the snapshot of how this process works. We have a risk assessment component, moving it into the root cause of whatever the top root or risk is, coming up with some additional causal factors. And then once we get the causal factors, we could start laying out the controls that we need to put in place to kind of mitigate those causal factors. I think we did come up with 70 plus controls for the top 10. So, all right, yep. So here's a better picture of it. So these are the top 10 health and safety risks in the pulp and paper sector. Actually, the inadequate or improper lockout of machines was the only one to be in the red category, the critical component. the things that keep you up at night. And we heard that quite often when we were doing our little doing these two things. And then there's a bunch of other ones: exposure to dust, paper dust, exposure to chemical agents, and we got a bunch of different ones there, H2S, chemicals, and we move forward. So what we do is take the top one, move it into the root cause analysis. And and Tom and I were talking before we got started here on the, we could go back if we wanted and go through and hit some of these other ones here and do the same process with the root cause. It's just, there tends to be a lot of work, and we're trying to go through a lot of the sectors to make sure that we're at least doing this and identifying some of the really high risks that are facing workers. So this is the first step that we come out with 79 events. We got the top 10 here on this page, and then we move into the risk or the root cause analysis. So this is the top 10 root cause analysis. So what we do is we take these elements: people, process, tools, machine, culture, environment, and we start identifying issues that we have at each of these levels. And so you could see that the lack of worker training and experience was probably one of the key things that come out in this, because there just didn't seem to be a lot of people really comfortable with the training that's going on, the worker training around lockout. A lot of issues around, what we were hearing were things like, the new worker training another new worker. So that came out, and you'll see when we start looking at the controls, is that that was something we identified. So this one here again is we had 45 items, and you'll see at the end there's a picture of me in there with writing on the whiteboard, and all of those items that are on the board are all these causal factories, the 45 that show up as being identified by the workers and the management people from various pulp and paper locations. And here's the control. So these are right now what workplaces can focus on immediately. I did speak to that first one about effective lockout training. There were some issues around trainer competency, evaluation, getting into site-specific and real-life scenarios, training, and knowledge transfer. So there was a pretty big component of the training aspect when it comes to lockout. So that came out pretty evident when we were doing the controls. We also got into some other workplace health promotion issues: fatigue, mental health, first aid, substance use were all ones. I mean, fatigue came out with, resources for being, in a lot of cases, some workplaces might not have the resources. And so now you're having some of the workers doing multiple things. And that's where the fatigue and mental health started to show up as well. We got into the corporate lockout policy. So one of the current and accurate procedures, enforcement, we got into communication, annual reviews, roles and responsibilities, lockout methods, and there's all kinds of different variations on that. And that was one of the key parts where we started really making sure that people were talking, when they're talking, they weren't thinking about their particular workplace, that they were thinking more from the industry itself and what we needed to do from a policy standpoint. So having current, accurate procedures was critical. Enforcing it, making sure our communication was getting out to all the people that would get involved in the lockout process. And then the last one is the development of engineered solutions. So this would be energy controls. I know Sujoy would go on about this artificial intelligence solutions, coming up with maybe more technical engineering issues around solutions, which we are seeing in somewhat in some of the locations. Just see if we can get that to be more stream or more of the more noticing it quite often in the workplaces. And to learn more about critical controls you can put in place to help prevent inadequate machine lockout in the workplace. And there is a technical paper that's available. So with that in mind, I think what we're looking for from everyone, we got a list of 50 somewhat people that have joined in. We're looking, those 4 that I just actually read out, we actually have a poll that Gabby's going to put up here in a second. And what we're looking for you is if you could come up, you could check all 4 if you want, or if you think that one of them is more important, then check just the one. What we're looking for is getting some feedback from all of you on what they think would be things that they could utilize, you could utilize in your lockout program. So we'll give you a few minutes to decide that, vote on it, and then Gabby's going to put up the results. So I'll let you, Gabby, tell me when you think you've got enough people.
Still have some votes coming in, so I will give everyone 15 more seconds.
I don't see any here for me, so I don't see the results. So. All right, so here are the results from this exercise. So, you know, we do have 83%, which is quite a significant amount, is to provide best practice for lockout training and hands-on skill training, which I think is a really good one. I do, and you know, and that's the thing with that I get, that I have the ability, because I go to various workplaces, I get to see a lot of variation in the lockout process. And those actually best practices are really, to me, things that we need to get out to locations. So, and then the other one is 51% for more hands-on adult learning principles, 49% or 48% of using WSN auditing. And then the last one is developing resource documentation, consultation and with suppliers or equipment manufacturers. So it's good to see this. We're going to save this, and this will help us when we start looking at putting, you know, some of these controls actually in place. So let's take a look at some of the controls. I think I've got a summary of controls, or oh no, I guess it's one last slide. Eh? Is there one more slide, Gabby?
Let me check. Do you want me to flip the slide to the next one?
Sure. I think there's one more. No, it's in the news, is raising awareness to help make workplaces safe. So we had a couple of articles that showed up that and I think Tom, who was down in the bottom right-hand corner there, I think was on TV for a little while talking a little bit about this. This is actually the risk assessment component, the picture up in the top that was done. And so this is one of the things that we're trying to do. This webinar is certainly helping with this, of raising awareness to show, you know, what the process is all about. We are moving into, you know, the corrugating sector is another one that we're looking to doing. And I think we're also talking about getting into the mining sector a little more. So I don't know if there's any questions, I guess. Tom, I think, oh, there's the picture of me. And, you know, the best part of this is you can make out the wording. So it's not really chicken scratch, which really helps when you're looking at the picture a couple months later. So, but this was some of the, actually the lines that you see going diagonal sort of are the 6 areas that we talked about. and then coming up with reasons why those are in place.
Thanks, Jerry. So yeah, like Jerry said, we do have some time for audience questions, and we have received some in the Q&A box. So I will welcome Tom back, and Jerry's already here. So just starting with one off the middle of the pile, someone asks, what is WSN doing to help industry focus on these immediately? Is there guidance on all of this?
Well, I can take that one. There'll be various resources that'll be available to all of you that are posted on the WSN website. And I know Gabby and team will be sharing that with you as well, including things like the infographics that you saw there. The infographics have a set, especially the one on the root cause results that were the primary causes, have a secondary page, which is very similar to the slide that Jerry went through, which identifies short-term controls that an employer can put into place right now. And we have some recommendations, as Jerry went through, to some longer-term controls that WSN is continuing to work with industry on and looking at developing, everything from an audit that we can complete in a pulp and paper mill, where we can go in and audit the lockout system and provide recommendations on gaps, provide sector-specific training for lockout for the pulp and paper industry and specific to the lockout program you're using in your mill, and provide your individual trainers with some additional support and guidance on providing that lockout training within your individual operations. To provide a few examples of the things we're working on that were recommended by the industry that Jerry reviewed and we're continuing to move ahead on.
Thanks, Tom. Another question here for you or Jerry says, with respect to effective lockout, does that include sample site observation / verification being performed during that portion of the LOTO task?
Jerry, do you want to take that one?
Yep. So I think actually that is would be a component of the training that's provided to these people, that they make sure that they're actually doing that verification. And I think, you know, some of the best practice locations I've seen, there was lots of workplaces, or not lots, but there were workplaces that would actually, the committee, Joint Health and Safety Committee, would do some of that verification, or at least, you know, verify that people are following the lockout procedures that they've been developed. So it is there.
Thanks, Jerry. Just checking, I see there are some questions in the chat box area as well as the Q&A. So someone asked, what best practices are available for the situations where there are many locking points? We have procedures, more than 50 locks that have to be used.
Well, I worked at Bowater, Resolute, and Thunder Bay, and this was always an issue for us. When we had to lock out our digester, you know, there was hundreds of locks actually on the system. So I'm not sure if there is anything right now that's there. But these are some of the questions that we can go to the manufacturers and talk about this and see what they can come up with ideas on how to address, you know, these lockouts that involve, like you said, the 50 or more, you know, locks, to see if there is a process. I mean, obviously lock boxes has made that, you know, a little better, but there's still going to be those situations where you're going to have a lot of locks on it, and maybe the manufacturer will be able to help out with that.
And Jerry, just to add, that's something that we're hoping to provide more assistance for industry on, and something that was identified as a control measure by the group and by the industry that they would like to see. So something we'll do some more work on.
This person also asks, what best practices for cases where a zero energy is not possible or practical, especially for the maintenance team when troubleshooting?
This actually, it's not pulp and paper related. The pulp and paper sector tends to tends to deal with zero energy. We don't get into too many situations when we're having, an intermediate, if you want to call it that, lockout process. But our corrugating sector does that quite often, where they are not fully locking out zero energy, but they are putting in measures to protect the workers. So there are lots of those. I just, if you're coming from the pulp and paper sector, you're probably not going to be finding too many situations where you're not locking out completely. So it's zero energy, typically in the pulp and paper sector. But I've known, just working with some of the corrugating sector that we deal with, that they are much more intermediate, not completely zero energy. And it would be related to troubleshooting, maintenance, maybe not so much maintenance, cleaning, where they need to have some power. And so there are situations where that occurs. And to be honest, in the corrugating sector, they do have a lot of systems in place that are protecting those people.
Yeah, Jerry, what I could add to that as well, from a broad forestry sector perspective, there are the need in many cases for inching and jogging procedures, but in each case, there has to be a written procedure that is consistently followed by everyone. And I think that's one of the most important parts of it, even though there may be unique situations where you get a jam up or have to address inching and jogging as part of the process. There should be a written procedure. And if there's not one that's unique to that situation, a risk assessment can be done and it can be developed.
Great. Another question is asking, how can we get the details of this process and results? And do you provide training on risk management?
I can take that one. We will be providing information and links that are associated with our website, from everything from the infographic to the full reports of both the risk assessment and root cause analysis process that Jerry mentioned. And those are posted with links on our website as well. So those will be available.
Great, thanks. They were also asking if we have risk management training.
Yes, we do. We have risk assessment training that we do within WSN. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to incorporate as part of our review of how we can assist industry from the lockout perspective into the training or assistance or resources that we provide to really focus in this area.
Thanks, Tom. Another question here asking, you mentioned culture earlier. How important is culture for proper lockout?
Culture is actually quite important. And I think when the culture is not there, that's usually when people start and I think about the list of items that we talked about under culture. A lot of it was around not following the proper procedure, taking shortcuts, were some of the things that were identified. So, those things are, when we start taking the shortcuts or we don't follow the proper procedure that's in place, that's when injuries happen. So, so culture is critical. It is kind of, I wouldn't say contentious when we were talking about it, but I know that it's something that's there, and you do need to have a good safety culture so that people are following the proper procedures and making sure they're not taking shortcuts.
So Jerry, question here just related to what you're talking about. How do we instill in our employees that lockout is for them and for their safety? So how do you drive that message home?
I think that's a pretty key question. I mean, it's people, I think you instill it in a lot of cases by talking about some of the incidents that have occurred with people not following proper procedure, and there's lots of them. And even you could bring in, I mean, like if you think of Charlie Moorcraft, who's lived his life, had a serious incident, and is a sought after person to come in and talk about, his situation. So those are things to me that you can brings people in, talk about, why they took a shortcut, and and people will see what the consequences are if you're not following the proper procedure. So I don't want to make it out like we're scaring people to follow the rules. But it just, as an employer, I mean, you got to do what it takes to get people to follow the rules. So
Great.
not sure I answered that, skirted it a little bit, but it is, I mean, in a lot of cases, if, we had those answers, we'd probably be okay in health and safety.
We have one last question here about artificial intelligence. So just asking if you can elaborate a little bit more on the artificial intelligence solution.
Go ahead, that's yours, Tom.
Thanks, Jerry. I was hoping Sujoy was be on the call so I could pass that on to him. Artificial intelligence, there are a variety of means associated with lockout, from light curtains to various artificial means that have been implemented through engineering controls. And we were fortunate to have actually an engineer tie in with our root cause analysis and provide some guidance from that perspective. That's something that we, through WSN, want to do a little more research on and provide some of the more current information associated with available engineering controls that are being developed by suppliers and made available to industry to make people aware of them. A lot of times we deal with what we have, and we're not always aware of what's new and what's coming out. So that's something I think we as a safety association can do a better job in providing some assistance in that area.
I think also, Tom, that I think there is stuff out there that's much better than it used to be. I think of light curtains and their ability. You can set it up so that it recognizes the shape of a roll or a bale or a cardboard, and will continue letting the product go through the on a roller or through the light curtain. But if they recognize that this hand that's going in that's not a usual shape, that they will shut it down. So it's it's almost like it's got intelligence to actually do that. So I just think if we go back 20, 30 years ago, some of the stuff that we're now putting in place is much more intuitive. And it's I know when Sujoy was talking about it, I really didn't understand him, but getting a better perspective of what he's talking about. I think it's stuff moving forward that's going to be kind of intuitive and make sure that our workers are safe.
Thanks, Jerry. We've had another question come in here, so we have some time, so I will address this one. It says, what about locking on push buttons? Example, going to clean in the dryers. The button is locked and key is in the employee's control, but it's not locked out at the source. Is this okay?
Based on legislative requirements, it would not meet the standard. You have to lock out at the actual lock box to ensure that it's fully locked out. There have been issues where people think something's locked out and it may create some issues. So I'd recommend that be looked at a little closer. And if it's a matter of moving the disconnect a little closer to the workstation, many employers have done that, and that addresses the issue and allows you to actually lock out at the energy source.
Thanks, Tom. So that looks like all the questions that we've received so far. So kind of in wrapping up, Tom or Jerry, do you have any final words or thoughts that you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I can start and Jerry can end off. We thank everyone for joining us today. We will be sharing this information with you as well as this presentation, so it will be available for you to utilize. Our WSN resources right across the province have been engaged in this process as well, so they're aware of this and can provide additional assistance. And we look forward to actually moving a lot of these items ahead. we're really at that, we've gone through the risk assessment, we've gone through the root cause analysis, we've got some suggested controls that we're sharing with industry as far as shorter term controls that you can put in place quickly, but we're doing a bit more research and development to see how we can assist industry even further by developing some controls that we can partner with industry in getting that information out there. And our long-term goal is once we have these controls out there and available to industry is to evaluate how effective they are. And that's really going to give us the full gambit of what we're trying to achieve through this process is to identify an issue along with industry from using frontline sources and really boil it down so that we can provide some assistance to help eliminate these injuries in the workplace.
I'll just reiterate that this process I found was very good. Hearing from the industry people and, and a lot of times, we may look at it and know what they need, but just having them participate in it, coming up with solutions, coming up with issues or factors was actually a really good process. And it's just a matter of, tying everything together and put those measures in place that are going to make it a lot safer for the workers. So that's it for me.
Perfect. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jerry. And thank you to everyone for attending the webinar today. Just a reminder that a copy of the presentation and the recording will be emailed to you within 1 business day and posted on the resources page of workplacesafetynorth.ca. So thanks again, and we hope you have a safe day.